Hi, welcome to another exciting episode of the Andre The Beast Crayton Show. Today, we're going to really have a great show because imagine the stories that we hear about California, and not just any California. Let's talk about Compton. What's it like growing up in Compton? And more importantly, how do you get out of Compton? And I'm not saying that all of Compton is bad, but the media has a way of portraying things to cause fear in a lot of people. Today, we got a man who grew up in Compton, got into law enforcement, and basically has had a beautiful career, even though he came out of Compton. He's going to share his journey, a little bit about Tupac, a little bit about Biggie, a little bit about Suge Knight, a little bit about Death Row Record. But more importantly, we're not here to go with conspiracy theories. We're here to talk about this man's beast mindset, how he survived coming out of Compton to have the career in which he had. Let's welcome to the show the one, the only, Mr. Reggie Wright to the show. What's up, big dog?
Oh man, respect, man. It's an honor to be invited over on your show, The Beast. Appreciate you inviting me and having me on your show, brother.
I appreciate that. Reggie, before we get started, because your resume is pretty thick here. So let's start from the beginning. Did you grow up, were you born in California in the Compton area?
Actually, in the Compton area, but actually, I'm a boy. My parents both came from the Imperial Courts housing projects, which is in what we call Watts, California,
Wow.
and they met in the Imperial Courts housing projects, and then I was conceived, and and I lived over there. My mother would get mad whenever I say I lived in the projects. She said, "Boy, you ain't never lived in the projects," but it was on a street called 115th Street, which
Right.
is just on just on the other side of Mona,
Right.
and so it wasn't actually in the projects, but that's where I was born and raised up until about the age of 6.
What's the difference between, the only connection I have to Watts and Compton is from the Boys in the Hood and Snoop Dogg and Ice Cube and all that. I've never been there, don't know nothing about it. I know about Los Angeles, but I don't know about those two. But when we hear those two names, it's always affiliated with drugs, violence, and gang related. You can't walk the street without wearing this color. If you wear green or blue or something, something's bad's gonna happen to you. And then dealing with, the Latinos and the Mexican. It was almost like Cambodia, the way they portrayed it on television. You grew up in Watts. What's the difference? Let's just stick with Watts. What was it like growing up for you in Watts?
Well, first, and I wanted to answer that because I hate that stigma that they put on us or portray us as,
Mhm.
because there's a lot of successful people from Compton, California. We can
Really?
sit up here and I could put a NBA All-Star basketball team from Compton, California, or NFL football team, or our girls Venus and Serena Williams in now. But
Wow.
Anthony Anderson as an actor and stuff. So there's a lot of successful people from the city of Compton. If we just talk about entertainment, I'm
Right.
not even talking about doctors and lawyers and people like that. So
Mm.
let's not do that. But of course, the media portrays a lot of the negative things that go on in the city of Compton, because in the 80s and the 90s, the crack cocaine era,
Right.
there was a lot of guys that were Ronald Reagan and his people, in my opinion, dropped it off in our communities. And so that had us fighting among each other.
Hmm.
But that was what was going on in the city of LA in the late 70s, early the mid 80s,
Hmm.
all the way to the mid 80s. Yes.
What was it like in Watts? I didn't. You don't hear much about Watts as you do Compton. Is that because
Because we
you
call it
guys?
South Central LA. When you
Okay.
hear about they talk more about South Central Los Angeles, and it's still just the Watts part. The
Hmm.
Watts Party is generally housing projects that were the Jordan Down housing projects, uh, the Nickerson Gardens, uh, the Imperial Courts housing projects, and places like that, um, that were really considered Watts, where the Watts riot took place at. Um, but you also have South Central Los Angeles, where you have a lot of areas. So that's probably why you don't hear about Watts too much. But you definitely heard about the Watts riot, and then later on the Watts parade that they normally had, and so it was a lot going on in the city of Watts, but mainly because you hear of South Central LA.
Right. How difficult was it for you growing up? Did you grow up in a single family home?
Uh, like I said, you didn't realize that you were supposedly quote unquote broke or in poverty growing up
Right,
because
right,
your parents made things happen for you.
right,
You could look at me and tell I never missed a meal in my life, but you know, but you didn't realize it. You didn't
right.
realize that you was quote unquote not financially or economically as privileged as some other people were. You didn't realize that until you got older and you start trying to make things happen on your own. I can honestly say I grew up my whole teenager or childhood life, and I didn't know that I was. I knew I wasn't on TV. I wasn't living like a Fresh Prince of Bel Air, but you couldn't tell me I was broke or my parents was broke. And
What
so
was it? Is how much truth is this? Like if you lived in South Central, we saw the movie. How much of that is accurate? How much is fiction? Like were
yeah.
you did you have friends in Compton and Long Beach and or was how much of that is actually true and false?
You generally stayed in what you call your neighborhood, your territory, and pretty much only dealt with kids uh, that went to schools with you
Mhm.
or played little league sports with you. With the basketball or baseball. That's the only time you really ventured out of your neighborhood. We didn't have like the AAUs, basketball camps and stuff like that, where all the kids meet each other and stuff like that. You pretty much just played with kids in your area. Uh,
Mhm.
you'll have all-star games, but quite frankly, you never made it too far out of the all-star league where I don't remember any of our teams ever making it, past maybe regionals or something like that.
Right, right.
So the most that you'll heard where you met other kids from another area is when your family or your school took you to Disneyland or Knoxbury Farm. That's when you saw other kids from
Mhm.
other areas, as far as I remember. Um, but what we see as far as the game, you got so many different type of things because you have three sets of kids. I always try to say that in growing up, and we all really kept to ourselves. You
Really?
had the game members, then you had the guys that were athletes, and
Mhm.
then you had the ones that we call them geeks, but they wasn't geeks. They generally probably our bosses now. But you had people like that grew up in the community, and for some reason we all protected each other. The
Right.
athletes, they clicked up and they wasn't scared of the game members, and the game members definitely, they didn't mess with the athletes. The geeks, they just stayed in their little area,
Mhm.
and so generally, as I remember growing up,
Mhm.
everybody just were clicked with themselves. The gang members very rarely victimize people outside of the gangs. You may take their jacket or mess
Right,
with them at the bus stop or something like that. But just going out shooting them for no
right,
reason, accidents happen.
right.
Where unfortunately sometimes the wrong person got shot or something like that. But they generally were trying to get someone else or a family member when stuff like that happens. So you walked around there in fear, knowing where you was at, but you
Mhm.
didn't fear it.
Right.
If that makes sense,
Yeah,
you
because
you
I've
you
heard
knew it
I've
could
heard
happen,
Ice
but you didn't fear it.
yeah, I heard Ice T talk about, Tukey Williams and, all this kind of stuff. And he pretty much said what you said. Um there was really nothing to fear. So why do you now this is a two-part question. Two-part question here. how did the portrayal of South Central, Compton, and Watts, and even with the riots, affect the way the people in the community looked at themselves? Because you're being portrayed on a bigger screen, like I said, drugs, violence, murder, senseless murders. You know, you can't go outside. You know, oh, my baby got shot. How did the film industry in that particular movie, and even the rap, which we'll get into in a minute,
Okay.
the East Coast, West Coast stuff, how did that change the community in general now that you're on a bigger stage now?
Yeah, well, pictures and movies like Colors and stuff like that
Yeah.
did expose other states or other parts of the country to what was going on in LA or the South Central Los Angeles area,
Hmm.
which also was Compton is pretty much Compton. People that lived in the city of Compton or Linwood or even to Long Beach, some parts of Long Beach, they
Hmm.
all came out of the housing projects. Most of the people that came from the South, they migrated to and the first place they went was to the housing projects, and then they got together and had their mother and father together, or the father or something got a halfway decent job and was able to go and buy that $28,000 to $30,000 house in the city of Compton back in the early '70s is
Hmm.
what they were going for. Now these homes in Compton are going for 600, 700,000. But
Wow.
when my parents bought, I remember they paid like $28,000 for their home.
Hmm.
Um, but I think to answer your question, it was just we just grew up in that area. We didn't know any better. That's just where we were all pretty much at. We were all region. Now you have people. We were like back then. The blacks that lived in one area. You
Hmm.
had a few of the Mexican people, and the whites were. We used to have something called the white escape, where the black folks was buying up all their houses, and they were moving to another community and stuff. And so we didn't live together like we do currently out here in California. Where we have what we call the IE area, where you have a bunch of Mexicans, Asians, whites, and everybody living in the same community.
Right.
Back then, you generally lived in Compton, Watts. If you was a little wealthy, your parents were doing a little better. They went to Carson or or Inglewood or Ladera Heights area
Right.
is where we was pretty much shooting for, communities like Hawthorne and stuff like that. Uh, and then if you were real lucky, your parents got the Cerritos, you know. But you looked at stuff like that as in my childhood uh, of growing up in the LA County area.
Right.
Um, but as far as like, there's a lot of people that still in the Watts area. Our Mexican brothers are kind of taking over a lot of the communities. If you come down to the LA County area, you'll be like, wow, where are they at? You go to Compton and people drive around. I take people to Compton a lot. And they be like, man, y'all got green lawns and this place don't look nothing like I imagine Compton to look.
Why do
Yeah.
you why do you think Compton was centralized and Watts? Why do you think those two
They call it the Hub
particular
City.
areas
Yeah.
was yeah, why do you think those two was amplified so much in the media and in motion pictures, even in music?
Well, because of Easy, NWA. I think that's what put Compton on the map. Uh, I really believe that the portrayal or the group in NWA made people centralize or look at the city of Compton, and I have to contribute that to them and
Yeah,
what
but
they were
don't you think
rapping and
it made
talking
them
about.
don't you think that it made people fearful? Because you're rapping and telling a story, but you're saying that it really wasn't like that.
Well, it was like that. You heard of it, you knew what was going on. They just didn't bother us. I don't think every movie that I saw, it was generally they were shooting each other because they were wearing red or the blue.
Mhm.
I guess Ricky got shot in Boys to the Hood, by the gang members, and he was an athlete. But
Right.
that very rarely happened, where the gang members shot the athlete. You didn't hear about that too often. You
Mm,
heard a lot about the gang members shooting the other gang members,
right.
but you didn't hear about, you know, you may have heard mama and daddy a little bit getting robbed, but they generally, man, were doing stuff to each other.
Oh,
And I didn't really experience it happening to, where mama was coming home because she got robbed by a gang member. The
right.
gang members usually protected mama and made sure it didn't happen.
How you mentioned something and you're right. When you're young, you don't realize that you're poor unless
I
somebody
didn't.
says something. I mean, we didn't grow up with a lot of money, but you know what? I had things that I needed for school. I had things that I needed to survive.
Correct. Mama used to
I need,
say for that week of first day of school clothes. Don't you remember?
yeah,
I
yeah,
don't even take my kid. I don't think I remember taking my son school shopping. You just had clothes whenever. But
right.
I remember I couldn't wait till first week of school so I could wear my new stuff.
Was it difficult for you, um, Reggie, to escape where you grew up, or did you, or were you comfortable, or was there anything to even run from? Because you're telling me
Yeah,
something totally different, and I respect that. Because, like I said before, television put you guys on the map, and
yeah.
it's really trying to dismember all the or defragment all the stuff that Hollywood put out there on your beautiful city and where you grew up.
And, and
But
let me say this. Let me say this, Beast. I'm telling my story. I
right,
I was fortunate enough to come from a two-parent home. A
okay,
lot of my friends and stuff like that did have single parents, came from single parent homes and stuff like
mhm,
that. So their story may not be my story.
right,
My father was a police officer growing up in the city of Compton. And so my life growing up was a little different.
mhm,
However, I also lived next door to a guy, a lot of people on the internet know, or lived in the community of Mob James, whose mother just raised them. And
mhm,
he have a totally, totally different story than I have
right,
about growing up, you know, less than 2 blocks away from each other.
mm.
But I'm just telling my story. So
growing growing
don't
up,
think I'm, cutting anybody else's story that had a different
right.
upbringing than I did.
You share something pretty interesting here. You got the crack epidemic going on. You got South Central, Watts, and Compton being glorified, you might sort of speak, as the place to get killed, the murder capital of the world, blah 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 blah. But here it is. Your father is in law enforcement. How were you looked upon?
Hmm. I no different. They know that I wasn't in the games. I was considered an athlete growing up, and I was little Reggie, the son of the cop. But they didn't treat me any different because I didn't run in their circles. I I hung with the athletes. That's all I knew. I very rarely knew the game members or knew that size, other than if I was in the classroom with them or went to school with them. That's the only time I knew all these guys from. It's from growing up with them playing little league
Mhm.
baseball and basketball, and then at school. But once they were 16, 15, 14, we were different then.
Right.
We
Now,
were we were in different circles.
after high school, when did the law enforcement come into your life?
I always wanted to be in law enforcement because, like I said, my father was in law enforcement. Uh, my whole childhood, I guess, from about the age of 8 or 9,
Hmm.
he was working in law enforcement, and so, and my father has always been my role model, the person that I looked up to and wanted to be like, and so, well, my ultimate dream was I did want to be a lawyer, but that didn't pan out too well, and I took and followed the footsteps of him briefly.
When you took the oath to do law enforcement, how did law enforcement change from? I know you and your father had to talk once you became a brother of the badge. What changed? What was different than the era that you witnessed your father being a law enforcement officer versus when you came in? Because now you're dealing with a whole different ball game here. You guys are amplified all over television. Uh the whole narrative has changed, but you're now a police officer. What was different with you coming in law enforcement versus your father?
Well, he was a different type of law enforcement. He was a community type based police officer before there was a such thing as community based.
Mm-hmm.
And that was just because of his raising from his mother, who had 16 other kids, and so they were quote unquote always broke and stuff. But she was the lady that my grandmother that helped get jobs. Uh, she worked for EDD, which is the unemployment department in the state of California, and she helped people get jobs. So she was more of a social worker type person, and so that's what he was brought up as, a social work type person. Uh, and so he was a little different than most cops were because, yeah, in his era, it was us against them.
Mm.
You know, the police were, having to fight with the Black Panthers, and y'all know how the Black Panthers
Right.
are of law enforcement then. Uh, um, gangs was just starting off. They used to call them graffiti units because they didn't want to accept the name as gangs until about the early 80s. That they started letting them be called gang members. They
Mm.
were called graffiti or taggers or
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that. That's how they looked at gang members until until they went and did what they did to that white girl in Westwood. If y'all
Mm.
don't know about that situation. And so he was in a different time.
Mm.
When I came on and when I started, I was in the crack era,
Right.
where guys were walking. They had $3,000-4,000 in their pocket at a time, uh, because they were making money from selling the crack cocaine. The rappers were talking about it, so everybody wanted to have the Samurai Suzuki Jeeps and or the nice Regals or Monte Carlos or the Oldsmobiles and stuff like that. And so they were a different era because they had a little bit more street money in their pocket.
Mm.
They didn't. We none of us owned anything, or none of them owned anything, but
Mm.
they had $3,000 in their pocket at any time because of how they were, pushing that little rock cocaine. The other bad part of it is you had the gang members that were profiting from it, but then you also had your sisters and your aunties and other people addicted to it that
Right.
would rob grandma to get that fix. And
Mm.
so that's what I experienced and had to learn how women were out there just selling their bodies, doing whatever, so they can get some money for that rock and that cocaine. And guys hanging out on the street, and grandma calling mad because there's 10 guys standing in front of their house, pushing that drugs, and they wondering what is law enforcement going to do about it? Why are all these guys standing there? Why can't I have neighbors come over to my house? Or people scared to come to my house because all these guys standing in front of the house selling drugs. So
How
those
did
are the different eras that we went through from the
right
70s to the 80s.
when you was in law enforcement? What was your role? What did you what? I know you probably went in to make a difference in law enforcement, but give me some examples of how that job became difficult for you because you've been amplified, like I said, through the media, through radio, through this and this. Now you're part of the law enforcement. Give me like at least three moments that was really impactful during your time as a Compton police officer.
Yeah, me, well, I was in the fuck the police era. IC had came out with that big song, or NWA had came out with that big song, and
And Cop
and then
Killer too. Remember Cop Killer?
and Cop Killer.
Yeah.
And then you also had people now having VH recorders where, like, now there's nothing to pull out a phone or tape. But back then, you get caught on tape doing some stuff because back then the cops were brutal. Cops
Mhm.
was doing things that they had no business doing in their mind to combat. what was going on. But now people were starting to, as we learned from the Rodney King situation and all of that,
Mhm.
when they pull out that camcorder, and once you get caught doing those things that you was doing as a cop, you better watch out because you'll be on the other side of the law, you know, or possibly facing that.
Mhm.
So that was the era that I was in, where cops used to get away with a little more in the mid '80s than in the '90s, where you had to kind of watch yourself and watch what you were doing because people, you had just had the riots, they were rebelling and people were uniting together and they would go against law enforcement and all of that. People were tired of the getting beat down after because you ran from the police and stuff like that. The old Chief Daryl Gates era was over, where the guys couldn't be calling people monkeys and stuff like that. As we found out in the OJ trial, uh, how cops used to talk on their police communications and stuff like that. So it was
Right.
stuff like that, the difference from my pops and them era that they were able to get away with, that in my era that I didn't be able to get away with. But it was mainly I was kind of different because I was young and I
Right.
was policing mainly guys my same age. And that caused a lot of problems. We don't mind taking orders or being disciplined by people older. But man, to be your same age or younger, a
Right.
person younger than you, policing you, those were the experience or the things that I remember that was different because I was 19 to the age of 21, 22, and that's what most of the guys that age that we were dealing with that was out there calling what we call problems or what I would have
Yes.
considered was problems.
Let me ask you a question, Reggie. You mentioned something. I remember the Rodney King beatdown. You're in law enforcement and you see these things. How,
Yeah,
how was the tension among the police themselves, the
yeah,
black versus the white? Because
yeah,
you just said there were officers doing things that they wouldn't be getting away with today. Like
correct.
what was the tension like? Let's call it what it is in the locker room.
Yeah, you didn't know that you was doing anything wrong until they put that on TV and the attorneys started breaking it down and you saw people getting indicted and going to jail and having to go in the courtroom, then you was like, whoa, because this was a norm. What happened to Rodney King prior to that happening to Rodney King, I probably saw 50 times,
Really?
if not worse. But once you realize and you get put in the media and you see people in what you would call higher positions saying, hey, y'all can't be doing that. If you get caught doing that, you're going to jail. Then that's what made you be like, whoa, okay.
Did you have any second thoughts when you witnessed this with your fellow brothers at arms disrespecting human life
Prior or after?
before and after?
Didn't think nothing of it. That was norm. You run from the police, you got your ass whooped.
Wow. That's stripped out. You said that's norm. Is it norm
That was the
because
norm prior to,
they
like I
taught you
said,
that when you got there to the to police, beat them down?
that was norm.
Wow. When did you
People
realize
don't
that it
like to speak
was
on it. You get it from Reggie Wright, you get the truth.
when did you
Anybody up
realize
there saying I'm lying, they're motherfucking lying. I
when
was
did you
there. I
when did,
saw it.
when did you realize that it wasn't norm? Because I don't think
Well, like
if
I tried to tell you earlier, I had a father that was different in law enforcement. He
right.
was one that was always against it. And I'm not saying every cop did it, because there wasn't. There were some that were community based or didn't, but the majority did. You know it. You talk to any guys that was on the streets in the '80s that will tell you when you had to chase guys, like they had to chase Rodney King all over the streets, and he get out effing off and flicking off the helicopters and helicopters after themselves, and they didn't see that happen before. I bet you they won't debate me on that.
Wow.
But like I said, you didn't realize you were doing stuff wrong until they started putting people in handcuffs and they start. having you going before the courts, and you started seeing your chiefs and your captains and your lieutenants telling you, "Oh, you can't be doing that. You're wrong. You're going to get disciplined."
Mm, mm. Let me ask the question. When did you decide to leave the Compton Police Department?
It wasn't that I decided. I kind of like was forced out because I got an injury. I got a medical injury, and I had started working with Death Row Records, and that was starting to cause a conflict.
Let's
And
talk.
that was in 1996.
Let's talk about 1996. You wind up going to death row. How did that come about?
Suge and I and most of the guys, like I said, grew up grew up together, uh, um, childhood friends, and um, I kind of had got a little reputation, and my father had a big reputation in the city,
Hmm.
uh, and we had got and he had got some intel that some of the guys that were working for Suge that were planning on robbing him and extorting him for money
Mm,
because he had death row going on and he was doing big things. He had been about 2 or 3 years in the business and was doing great things. And we got the intel to him, and he pretty much asked us to come over there to protect him, to try to keep those guys at bay.
Now, did you know? Did you, let me make sure I'm understanding this right? You knew Suge from
Yeah.
from your childhood years.
We knew each other from ever since about the third grade. He's a year older than me. So he was probably in the third grade and I was in the second grade when I my first remembrance of him. But mainly just from playing. He played baseball and football and played against each other.
Hmm.
We lived about 3 or 4 blocks away from each other, and back then you pretty much stayed on your street
Right.
or in your area, so you just knew each other from school and stuff like that. But we
Yes.
did go to high school together,
Hmm.
and that's when we played high school football together, and we became closer. I
Hmm.
would never call us best friends or anything like that
Right.
at that point, but we knew each other and we dealt with each other.
When he gave you the offer to come and work for him, you knew each other, but you really wasn't close. Did you guys? Now that you're working for him, did you keep it like that, or did you become? Did the business relationship become a little bit closer, which means
Ye-
now you got to bond with him to some degree, or did you just keep it neutral?
Uh, Initially, it was professional. Uh, that relationship grew, and it probably grew closer once he got. Uh, he went to prison, and he needed somebody that he could trust. And by then, I think I had showed him a little bit of trust, and then I hope that the trust have grown, and and then it got better, and then you know, at one time, some people would have said we were like brothers. You wouldn't know it today, the way we'd be arguing and tapping at each other on the internet.
Hmm.
But uh, but if some other people listen to us and have heard us talk, they would be like, "Y'all are crazy." Because one minute y'all arguing, the next minute y'all laughing and hee hawing, and that's just how our relationship has been
And
of
what's your
late.
relationship like now? I mean, to be somebody's bodyguard and security, that speaks volume.
Yeah.
Speaks volume.
I
What's
think
your
we got a
relationship
little
like
more
now?
closer than the bodyguard security stuff because Suge ain't never been one to really need a bodyguard.
Right.
He's bigger than I am, stronger than I am. Uh, and so it wasn't that he needed a bodyguard. I just think he needed somebody that he could trust around him because he was having trust issues with some of the guys that were envy of his success at the time.
How cutthroat is the game? You've been around all of them, the Snoop Dogs, the Tupacs, the Biggies. You probably almost like
I never been around Biggie.
um
You know,
not being around them, but I mean you've
Definitely never been around Diddy.
what's it like? What's it like? Is it cutthroat? You hear these names. Is it cutthroat?
uh Man, that's a hard question because depending on the situation, if you're talking about trying to get into business and all of that, or are you talking about just being a friend, or you're talking about fighting over a female.
The whole 9 yards.
Yeah, it's all of that, huh?
Yeah.
um, I, once you get to a certain status, I think it's people is like, "What have you done for me lately?" or "What can you do for me?"
Hmm.
Is what I generally learn. Once you're no use to me anymore, it generally goes out the window when it comes to those type of people.
Hmm.
Now, people like the James or even Suge and I or my boy Bob Gotti and people like that, a guy by the name of Dwight Story, people that you grew up with,
Hmm.
you take a little bit more, you can deal with a little bit more and tolerate with more than
Hmm.
what a person you just met because of a working relationship.
Hmm.
And so that's the experience that I got. People that you met through your business or whatever, it's hard for me to call them friends.
Right.
You know, they work relationship or work buddies. But people that I grew up with, that I was in the sandbox with, that I went to school with, and they know my mama, I know their mama. I'd have been in their house. It's just different to me. Just different of what you can do or what you can say and what you allow them to do to you.
What was the most difficult part of having that job title, knowing all the stuff that was going down and about to unfold, from murder to extortions to, here's a legend, Tupac and Biggie, that's now, murdered. I mean, these are icons, and you're the bodyguard of the person that, quote unquote, they said has something to do with, and that's irrelevant here. My question to you is, with all of that, you're still his, security, head of
Yeah, I
security.
was ultimately responsible for security, but I ain't never did a day of bodyguard work in my life. I hired guys that were bodyguards. Uh,
Mhm.
but and I never worked with Tupac like that or anything like that. So
Mhm.
my relationship with a Tupac was totally different than my relationship with a Suge Knight.
Mhm.
Uh, totally different. I mean,
Mhm.
me and Suge will talk about everything from, I can't think of a subject that we haven't talked about. Where Tupac, it was just about, hey, who gonna be with me today? Uh, make sure that my guy is here, or his manager or assistant saying, make sure your guy is here at such and such time because he got to be on set or he got to be at this location at this time. So those are different type of conversations, and those would be my experience from them, from
What
different people and stuff.
what was how did you deal with the aftermath? With all this stuff going on, and all of a sudden your name may or may not be implicated in this. Like, how was you able to still navigate and still hold a friendship in a business relationship with Shook?
Oh well, because his name was mentioned as well. It was Reggie and Shug. It wasn't, like Reggie did this as a Lone Ranger until just recently. But when you know the truth, when
Right.
you know what really happened, you just and all of this stuff is just new. You
Right.
didn't hear of, you didn't even think of this in the 90s. You heard rumblings of things or people saying that, but you knew it wasn't people that were involved. The
Mhm.
people that done created all the narratives and stuff like that have never probably met Tupac or seen Tupac before in his life.
What about this guy? What's his name? Teffy D, or uh
Keefy D.
yeah, Keefy D. Like, I hear this dude doing more jaw jacking. You would think that, man, he said in the he you would think that dude sat next to you and Suge Knight and all you guys every single day. What's your take on all this gossip?
Well, as far as what though, as far as the business side or just for the shooting of Tupac, the
He's
shooting of
talking about
Tupac, he knows
everything. You would
about.
think that he knows more about it than anybody else.
He should. He was involved. He the one. He was in the car with the guys that shot, so he should know. So why is he doing it? Why he doing that talking? I'm sure right now sitting in jail right now and wishing he wouldn't have. But uh, hey, that's what he elected to do, and now he has to pay for it. But if you're talking about what was going on at the record company or something like that, then we can have that conversation.
Right,
But if we just talking about the shooting of Tupac, who else should be able to speak on it? If you believe that theory.
right. So
But
there's all kind of theories out there.
you have all type of theories. That seems to be the one that, thank God, the DA and the investigators on the case seems to believe most prevalent. Uh, the people that just getting stuff off of YouTube and what they heard,
Hmm.
then they have an opinion, and they may have some different opinions. But what evidence do they have?
How
That's
do
what you
you
got to have.
how do you
What?
keep
Tell me somebody that resourceful that investigated this that has a different version. You can't.
how do you keep your family protected from all of this? You have a wife. How do you and your grandfather? How do you keep your kids and your family protected from the gossip and your relationship with Suge? How do you keep going and not have your name tarnished?
To be honest, that's why I came on the internet. If you look up anything about me, nobody knew how the Reggie Wright looked until about 2014,
Mm,
which was like what's that? 10, 14 years?
mm,
14 years to 16 years
hmm.
after the death of Tupac. Nobody knew. Couldn't find a picture of me. Didn't know. Didn't didn't know who Reggie Wright was. But it was because my son had the same last name, and I was seeing all of the white folks that had nothing to do with Death Row, Tupac, or anything, doing documentaries and you know, saying bad things on my name. That made me come out and defend it
Hmm.
and to get involved in it.
Like what
I
were they
hate that
what
I
were they
did it.
saying, what was they saying about you, Reggie,
Uh,
that was tarnishing your name, that you had to come out and say, hey, you wasn't in the studio, you wasn't in the car, you wasn't this, you don't all this is bull crap.
Well, the statements were that I wanted to take over Death Row with Suge's wife or ex-wife, and we would conspire, and we was trying to kill Suge and Tupac, so we can take control over the company. Is what the theme were, and then people were starting to say because they didn't want to believe that it was as simple as some gang banging activity going on.
Right.
That it had to be bigger than that. It had to be cops that could shoot the expert. Man, a crook on the street probably could shoot a gun better than I can. you know, but it had to be somebody that had all this training and all of that did this because the guy Tupac couldn't have just died like that. He
Right.
he would have never died like that. That would have never happened to Tupac.
Right. And it's kind of sad that, when you think about it, it has been some years, but it's funny that we can't come up with the real reason why two senseless murders happened,
We have.
but
People
we
just don't
coming
want to
out with,
accept it.
huh?
We have. They have. People
Really?
just don't want to accept it
Why do you think they don't want to accept it?
because it was too simple. It was too simple. It had to be a bigger picture. It had to be because the government wanted Tupac dead. It had to be because Tupac shot two police officers that the police wanted them dead. Uh, it couldn't be just because he put his hands on a guy in the MGM lobby. They got in a car and they came and did a shooting. That don't sound right. That don't make sense. Stuff like that don't happen. Guys don't retaliate that quick. Guys wouldn't have been able to shoot Tupac like that because
Mhm.
he moves like Michael Jackson move and all of that.
Right.
No, Tupac wasn't moving like that.
Right.
Tupac, you got plenty of pictures with Tupac out there, just him or one person,
Right.
him alone and stuff like that. Show me a picture with Michael Jackson when he out there. I bet you he got 10 or 15 people around him.
Right.
But people want to make Tupac Michael Jackson. And that's because they don't know the 90s. They just know 2025.
Mm, mm, mm. What was the biggest thing that that you wanted to clear up about your name and you being implicated in this?
Just the truth. That just that I had nothing to do with it, and this is why are y'all listening to these people that had nothing to do with it as well? In their opinion, why? Well, here's the truth. Here's my version of what happened.
And you know what's so funny, Reggie? Even if that was the case, somebody would have probably already taken you out.
Possibly if you got people that believe in and 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 and,
Conspiracy
and,
theories?
and love Tupac like that,
Yeah.
but a lot of the people, 90% of the people believe Keefe D and them had something to do with it. Nobody has taken out Keefe D.
I know you may or may not know the answer, but was there friction with the record label? Was there friction with the artist? Was there friction with basically control of an organization that either one of those artists could have amplified them to a whole bigger status? What's your take on that?
I don't believe it. We didn't see it at the time. You could hear the way people talk now, like, damn, did he really feel that way in 95, 96? We He didn't act like he did in 95, 96, but
Hmm.
but maybe he did. So you have that now, but you didn't feel that back then. The
Hmm.
feeling wasn't there. It was like all love back in 95, 96.
How does it's been years now, and the theory still lingers. What could have been the myth, the legend, they passed away. Two outstanding artists. You have to think about this all the time because you was in the midst of this entertainment conglomerate.
Yeah.
How difficult is it for you to even know that you have to still go on and these legends have moved on, but your name is still implemented in it to some degree?
Yeah. Well, I believe in the Bible, and my Bible teaches me that they both were going to die on those dates that they died. From the day that they were born, they were going to die those days. That's what the Bible says. Uh, that your date uh, is already written in stone from the date of your birth, from you being in coming out of your mother womb.
Mm,
So Tupac was going to die that day.
no matter
Now
what.
the Bible doesn't say how,
Hmm.
and so I think the question should be how he died.
Hmm.
Uh, does that bother you? Versus that's why he's dead now.
Mm,
If you Bible, a lot of people are not don't believe in the Bible, so I can understand. They like, what the hell this nigga talking about? I get it,
hmm.
but that's what I believe. So I believe he was supposed to die that day. Unfortunately, that's what God had for him, the day for him to die.
Hmm.
Now, um, what bothers me is the how, and I wish yeah, there are things that I could wish that my security, because like I said, I was a security company, not the bodyguard, the where he died or the watch that he died under.
Hmm.
I wish there were things that were done better, meaning uh, retaliation, you know, or what's the correct word? Return fire
Hmm.
or stuff like that. When the person did that, or being a good witness to get the license plate, chase them down, get a good description, and report it to law enforcement and all of that. Yeah, I wish stuff like that would have happened that night. Um, but other than that, I don't have a problem sleeping because ultimately, nobody wants to admit it. I'm gonna sound messed up by saying this, but Tupac Shakur caused his own death by putting his hands on a man in that MGM lobby that he shouldn't have had no reason to do. But nobody want to hear that.
Mm. Because it's too simple.
Too simple.
You
It's Compton,
mentioned,
LA.
and Reggie, let me say thank you for coming on the show and sharing your life story, especially being entwined with this. And I know, like you said, that you wish that something could have been done different. But unfortunately, you also said something that was very, very keen. From the moment you're born, you got a day to die, and then there's nothing nobody can do about it.
Nobody can
That's
do
just
it.
a simple fact. What's your life like now? What are you doing now?
I'm
You
recovering.
grandfather? You married? What's going on with you?
I'm married, happily married. Have a great wife that's part of the reason, other than God, or it wasn't my date, as we just said. uh, that so I can't. I guess I can't say that. I guess it just wasn't my time.
Right.
That that's helping me get myself back right. I caught that COVID bad. That COVID tried to take a brother out, but God said it's not your date,
Yeah.
and so I'm just gonna slow you down and mess you up for a bit. But it's coming back, and everything's coming back, and that's my life right now. Is just trying to love my family. Ex- uh, my wife think I spend up too much of our little money that we have, but just trying to enjoy life, make
Yeah.
sure that everybody that's around us is happy, and appreciate the people that that's in my corner.
How can the viewers reach out to you to know more about who you are, your story? Because you're a great guy to talk to. I appreciate the interview, man. You're great. You've been patient with me and stuff. How can the viewers follow you and know more about you?
Yeah. Just contact me. DM me like you did, your staff did. Hit me up on IG, and if I'm available, I'll make it happen. I apologize to you. I know I flaked out on you a couple of times, and
That's all right.
uh, but you have a great staff. You're very organized,
Thank you.
and your people, man, they do a good job of communicating and sending out stuff to make sure that your schedule is tight.
I
So
appreciate that.
shout out to you, brother.
Ladies and gentlemen, this has been another. No, let me go back because I'm missing something here. Make sure you guys click, follow, listen to his story, and more importantly, remember this is a judge-free zone. This show today wasn't about who did what to who. This was Reggie telling his story. A young man from Compton to law enforcement, having the responsibility to protect another human life. And he's telling his story the best way he knows how, which is authentic truth. With that said, all it takes is a click of the button to change somebody's life or to make a difference in somebody's life. This has been another, and I do mean another, exciting episode of the Andre the Beast Crayton show.